Here we are at the Plant Science 101 gardens. Many of you have had a garden here in the past when you took the class with Dr. Zachary. Here's a great example of site prep for any kind of annual agriculture. We have beds and furrows, right? We have these nice beds. This would be where you'd plant your plants, right? If it was a diverse assemblage of vegetables for your project in class, or if this was that pumpkin patch that we saw out at the other end of the farm. The furrows here are to support irrigation, right? And we're going to talk about capillary rise when we get to porosity and soil water relations. And how can you just pour water in that furrow and know that the plants are going to be able to take that water up with their roots if the roots aren't deep down in the soil profile? Capillary rise is going to be an interesting topic to talk about later. Now, let's head over to this orchard and start talking about perennial production. So now we're in a nice walnut orchard, right? California has a diversity of crops and cropping systems, as we've been talking about, and nut crops is no different. Nuts, fruits of all different types, right? Walnuts is kind of a traditional orchard crop in California, as traditional as California agriculture is, and it's one of the two dominant ones in the North Valley, walnuts and almonds, right? Some of the benefits, like we will talk about in orchard systems, you have a nice higher plant, complicated structure. You get shading, different light dynamics than you would in an agricultural system. It's a system that you're planting and thinking about over a longer time span. The things that happen in this system, annual cropping, you get tillage and disturbance and a lot of dynamics that happen every year driven by microbial activity, decomposition, that kind of stuff. Orchards are pretty stable, right? They don't get tilled that much. They just sit here and grow and get watered, putting in deep roots and making a different biogeochemistry, really, or a different way that the system functions. A couple things to point out that we'll come back to when we sample. We'll come back and show you this in great detail. But orchards kind of have two pieces. They have this spray strip right here where they keep it bare, and then the inter-row. And in orchard management, there's a lot of discussion about the wet places and the dry places. And later on when we sample, we're going to show you how dynamic those two minor changes in land use can be on soil properties, creating platy structures in this part and other soil features in the rows. And then you can even think about this is bare versus off in the distance you can see a green patch, just a few, 6 rows from us. That's the place where they have an intentional grass, or they allow the grass to grow. And we'll even be able to see the difference between bare ground in the orchard and orchard that has grass growing in it. The future is intentional cover cropping in orchards. It's a great opportunity to create a lot of service and value in a system that only is growing one crop a year. Later, I'll just bring up annual or perennial cropping in California going towards multi-cropping, having a winter crop, right? Maybe even changing the spacings of the trees to diversify the space so you could have more crop, right? Versus everything's focused towards the trees, right? It's a really interesting thought and story that you would start to diversify the land use in an orchard like this, where everything's focused on one thing, the tree and the nut. But what about using Dr. Zachary's faba beans as a way to produce, capture nitrogen, create biomass that could be used for feed or forage as a winter cover crop? Extra. Now we've walked out of the orchard, they're dark and deep inside because of all the tree, the high canopy and the leaves, the high density of leaves in these orchards. We'll talk about leaf area index when we talk about productivity, but think about leaf area index as a side thing. Now we're going to walk out into probably the most unique land use on our farm in some ways, into the organic dairy and the beef pasture systems on our really nice almendra, Chico, or conejo soils here around Chico. Most of it now is used for two primary land uses, nut crops and urban, places where things have been disturbed. This system is not as dominant because the profit margin on pasture isn't as high as some of these nut crops. So we're going to walk over into that really nice green field and talk about pasture, perennial grass, and the importance of roots on soil properties.